This is the mini lecture on sociobiology. The focus of much evolutionary theory down through the years had been on the natural environment. Basically, okay, you got the organism, like a human being or a dog, and you got the rest of the human population, you got the pack of dogs, but the focus was on the rest of the natural environment, putting pressure on, and the species adapting to the natural environment apart from its adaptations within its own social group. Now, this actually really misunderstood Darwin, who emphasized sexual selection as being very important, and we talked about that in the past. But that kind of was left behind. You might remember how the dominant theory, kind of as part of the neo-Darwinian synthesis, was to think that sexual selection is just a matter of signaling that what members of a species find sexually attractive, it just goes hand in hand with something that makes that particular potential mate to be bigger, stronger, faster, smarter, more likely to survive and reproduce. But Darwin believed that sexual selection was something in and of its own right. In other words, you could say that something social going on between creatures of one species was very important in natural selection, not just the outside environment, so to speak. But sociobiology, as a recognized discipline or sub-discipline of biology, wasn't really around until the middle of the previous century, and didn't become big until the 1970s when biologist E.O. Wilson wrote a book entitled Sociobiology. What is sociobiology? Well, the basic idea is that nature has selected, or that we have helped nature select, for success within our species, for successful social interaction. It's kind of, if the group is able to interact in a beneficial way, in an adaptive way, then it's people will be able to survive and reproduce within the group, and to be able to adapt as a group to nature. So much of our intelligence, as it's evolved, has been for us to be able to get along with our fellow human beings. Sometimes maybe to be so clever as we can fool our fellow human beings, but various kinds of traits, their tendencies, behavioral tendencies, will be selected for by nature. And we can think of even something as maybe primitive as bees, that are very social and have all kinds of signals that they have to understand, and all kinds of etiquette within the hive and so on. So social organisms evolve very complex social behaviors that are not just imposed upon us by the environment, are not just individual choices, but are basically social inheritance, social behaviors that are or tend to be determined or encouraged, at least, by our genes. Now that leads to one of the raps against sociobiology, namely that it tends to be too deterministic. And there have been very other influential biologists, such as Stephen Jay Gould, to mention one, who said sociobiology overemphasizes the causal effectiveness, the determinism of genes on our social behavior. There's also the particular environment, the natural and social environment, and our responses to it that determine behavior. It's not all genetic, or almost all genetically, basically predetermined. Now, and speaking of maybe this whole genes maybe determine everything or almost everything, perhaps you've heard about, maybe seen on a video, TV, movies, maybe you've read about identical twins who were separated at birth and then end up being very similar, having the same interests, like wrestling, maybe in the case of two identical twin brothers. And some kind of weird things where they both end up marrying wives with the same name, and maybe they're divorced and their second wives have the same name, and things that just seem really coincidental, or how it seems kind of ridiculous that some of those things could possibly be determined or strongly encouraged by genes. As maybe, and it may not just apply to the social tendencies, social behaviors, but maybe a rule of thumb that a lot of biologists might more or less accept is that maybe genes account for about 50% of our behavior. The particular environments and our own choices maybe account for another 50%, but that's just one way of doing the arithmetic that I've heard is seems to be somewhat common. Well, I did want to get back to sexual selection, which is a big part of sociobiology, because that involves maybe the most directly, right, who procreates, who passes on, who gets to pass on genes. And sexual dimorphism is a big reality when it comes to sexual selection and sexual behavior. That is, dimorphism means literally two different shapes or forms. And those forms basically, or most often, at least most obviously, tend to be male and female. Although things can get complicated with some who maybe don't identify with a particular gender, maybe homosexual in terms of their sexual proclivities, their sexual attractions, may be transgender in feeling they don't conform to their biological gender, or the gender that maybe is socially has some certain traits that are culturally socially associated with the gender, and the person doesn't feel comfortable with those. But by and large, in terms of procreation, at least, there's this sexual dimorphism. Differences between male and females. In some species, it's huge. And in these species, typically, the males tend to be much, much larger. You could think of gorillas in terms of relatively close relatives to us. You can think of maybe bighorn sheep, but the males tend to be hugely bigger than the female. Typically, with these species, there's a dominant male who gets to fight, or at least faces off, among rival males, and if he's the winner, he gets to mate with all the females, or almost all the females. Maybe a weaker one who's lost or did not challenge the prime male, the alpha male, may get to procreate, or possibly procreate, get to have sex behind the back of the alpha male. But generally, the alpha male has all the sex, the male sex, and the others don't. Now, human beings are in the other category of minor, relatively minor sexual dimorphism. Men tend to be bigger, more muscular, so there's dimorphism. But compared to the species where you have a dominant male who monopolizes all the females, we're pretty egalitarian. We tend to be fairly equal. I mean, that's the way it was in hunter-gatherer tribes, small tribes down through the ages, through prehistory. Now, you did have, as we human beings settled into larger societies and into empires, you sometimes did have the practice of a great king or emperor that would have a harem, but that has not been the dominant thing through even civilized history, right? Not too many people have harems today. I mean, Muslims allow up to 4, although most Muslims are monogamous or just have one wife at any given time. Of course, there is in America the polygamous history of Mormonism, and in order to become a state, Utah outlawed polygamy, and it's been against the law in Utah, just like it has been in other states for ages. But recently now, there's a law proposed in Utah to make it legal, because there are in these split sects, Mormon sects that split off from the mainstream Church of Latter-day Saints, Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, there are those who have practiced polygamy, not officially recognized, but everyone's on board. It seems to be all consensual, so it may well happen that in Utah, some polygamy will be legal once again. Generally, except with at least with those species that are more or less equal, that have limited sexual dimorphism, it tends to be the woman who gets to choose, right? We men kind of compete, in this case not against so much against the alpha male as the only one who may get to have sex with females, but we get to kind of show off, with birds, maybe we've talked about this, with their plumage, with their song, with their dance, that type of thing. And we males get to show off, of course, by our physical attractiveness and trying to make that as visible as possible, trying to, and sometimes to maybe correct for, or get the haircut or whatever that might make us look most physically attractive, and so women get to choose based on that, and we get some choice too as to which women we try to get interested in us if we're male, and also women, and men as well, can select on things such as smartness or strength or ability to hopefully earn a decent income, looking like they'd be a decent parent, right? A reasonably loving, caring parent. All kinds of things come into play. But, we get to select mates, and generally, at least sociobiology and biology in general have told us, it's going back to Darwin, it's generally, at least in those species that are relatively equal, it's the woman who is the primary chooser. So a little bit about sociobiology, of course. I'll welcome comments, questions on our discussion thread on this or anything else. See you later.